Welcome to the Pauper Players Podcast. I'm Freestyle. Thank you so much for joining me. If this is your first time joining me, the philosophy of this podcast is to speak to the players who are shaping the metagame so that their voices can be heard. This week's voice, AdeptoTerra. He's been on the podcast previously after putting up some results with Fogtron. We've also had some Italian guests on podcasts in previous episodes to discuss Paupergeddon, which is a series of 3 tournaments across Italy where they draw a large crowd. These are some of the largest, if not the actual largest Pauper events that happen in the world. And it's a whole culture. It's quite the event. AdeptoTerra split the finals of a 238 player event. It was a long, grueling experience, but at the end of Paupergeddon, they crowned themselves a prince. Welcome back to the podcast. For anyone who wasn't able to join us for your last episode, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
I'm Alessandro Moretti, AdeptoTerra on Magic Online. I'm a 25 years old Italian player. I'm a part-time worker. Sometimes I stream on Twitch, usually in Italian. I played in the last Paupergeddon, reaching the top 8. I was not lucky to be able to split the final against my friend on Matteo Mazzola on Untitled Chapter.
And you're also responsible for the influx of memes in Pauper.
Yeah. Recently, a huge amount of memes on Reddit is partly my fault because I started 1 month ago a meme train asking for more memes on Reddit, and Reddit answered my ask.
You are memeing when you say Mimi, right? No. It's meme.
Well, actually, it's meme. Well, you know, Italian is a bit different language compared to English, so a lot of English words we are not really sure how to spell it.
Okay. Why did you call on the community to make memes?
In Italian community, we jokes a lot and we use a lot memes in discussions, obviously talking also about the Pauper and other parts of Magic. So it was kind of weird to me not seeing memes on the international or on the English community. So actually, I don't remember exactly what was that meme which started the big influx of meme. I labeled the Reddit thread, "We need more memes," just for joking, actually. So I wasn't expecting to see so many memes after my first meme.
I have 2 questions for you about the tournament. What does winning the tournament mean to you as a player? And follow-up question, what does winning the tournament mean to you as a content creator?
I really love winning in Magic. My tournament started 1 month before the 16th February, the date when the tournament was held. And when I say my tournament started 1 month earlier, I mean I started practicing and testing and figuring out, for example, was the expected metagame. So after figuring out what kind of decks my opponent can play, I'm able to figure out what deck is the best for me to play in that tournament. So for example, I played Tron because I think it's one of the best decks right now, but also is the best deck for me because I enjoy playing Tron and I actually good playing it. I think it's well positioned in the tabletop metagame, and there's no reason to play a different deck. I expected a metagame filled with decks like Blue-Red Furies, Affinity, and Flickertron. So the other choice for me was actually Elves, but I haven't played it a lot. And Elves, it dies from singles cards, is not really stable. You need to play cards like Blue Elemental Blast to counter cards like Swirling Centaur or Crackling Shaman. And Elves plays only one island, and you can counter cards like Silver Ranger or Virtual Ranger. It dies from many things. So to me, Flickertron was more stable and probably more performant in a competitive metagame. After testing and playing a lot that deck, I felt really good after finishing in the top 8 and winning. Yeah, we can say me and Ito Shift, we both win the tournament. Talking about the part of content creator, well, there's not so many content creators in Italy. Talking about Pauper, obviously. When you're playing at high levels, and when you are winning a lot, people start knowing you. So you have a lot of friends in the Pauper community. A lot of people can ask you for any advice regarding any aspect of the game or the format or specific archetypes. So it's really enjoyable I also love to talk with people about the format, talking about also the community. It's really enjoyable to me.
And actually I have a couple questions about both. Let's start with the community. Previously, when I had a couple of Italian guests on the podcast, they expressed that there is generally a very large dinner the night before Paupergeddon, a feast of sorts. Did you attend, and what was that like?
Sadly, I wasn't able to attend to the large feast the day before the tournament, but usually this dinner have something like 20 or 30 persons. It's very animated. There's a lot of people, a lot of alcohol, a lot of wine, beer, and sometimes the waitress came to ask to be more quiet because maybe you are creating a lot of noise, so maybe you are disturbing other guests to the tournament. Yeah, it's chaotic.
Well, that sounds fun. Did you celebrate it all after winning it? Since you weren't able to attend the night before party, after taking down the event, surely you went and got a glass of wine or something.
After the winning, I wasn't able to attend any party to celebrate the win. We finished the tournament in a really late hour in the night, past midnight. So we just went home. Personally, had to working for the next day, and we had something like 3 hours by car. So I slept only for 4 hours that night, and then just woken and fleet to work.
For the tournament, did you do that all in one day? Did you drive the 3 hours to play there, play all those rounds, and then drive 3 hours back all in one day?
Me and my friends drove straight to the tournament from my hometown and then went back in only one day. And from my hometown to Milan is something like 2 hours and a half. So we drove for something like 5 hours in total, and it was tiring because Italians as Europeans usually don't drive a lot to reaching tournaments location. We usually drove 1 hour or 2 hours usually. Some friends of mine from different cities passed that Saturday before the tournament in a hotel or something similar. Maybe someone in a bed and breakfast. They had more flexibility in that kind of aspect.
I'm sorry, how many rounds was this? Because I'm really curious how long that all took.
The tournament was 9 Swiss rounds and 3 rounds from the top 8. So we played 11 for 11 rounds.
Wow, that's a long day of Magic.
Yeah, it was probably the longest tabletop event for Pauper because the Greater Pauper tournament held in London, I think in the last year, was a side event. So it was maybe only 5 rounds. I'm not sure about that.
What do you usually do in between your rounds? Or do you even have time to do much of anything because you play Fogtron?
Usually during between rounds, I have sometimes, obviously, because not any round finishes in during the additional turns with Tron. We can also win only. You can also play only 2 games with Tron. The best thing usually is getting some air outside, eat something, just went to the bathroom if you need. After something like 5 turns, the locations start to be not really pleasantly talking about the air conditions. There's a lot of people, so...
I sort of have some questions about the difference between the online competitive scene and the real-life competitive scene. Some of those questions are a bit logistical, but some of them have to do instead with just basic things we cover on the podcast, like card selection. What cards in your deck are a result of you playing a paper Magic tournament?
So I was expecting a bit different metagame from the online scene. Usually on Magic Online you can face more Mono Green Stampede and more Mono Red Burn. I wasn't expecting to face one of them, and so I cut the Lone Missionary from my sideboard because I played the Lone Missionary only for these 2 archetypes, and I haven't faced one at all of them. Also, one important thing when we are talking about Tron is you need to win at least 1 match, so you need to have a fast win condition. I used to play Rolling Thunder previously, before the print of Modern Horizons, and cards like Ephemerate in the Cave of Temptation. Right now, Cave of Temptation helps a lot because you can just crack 1 or 2 filter land on your Muldrifter and you have a faster clock. Anyway, I put 1 copy of Fireball in my sideboard because it's a good answer to mid-range strategies. It's a good answer to decks like Boros Monarch and Blue-Red Furies. So it was good for both reasons. Trying to win faster, try to have an additional answer to that archetypes.
You said there's not a lot of burn and there's not a lot of stompy in the Italian metagame. Is there a regional favorite that is a bit more dominant than perhaps it should be? I know that when we speak with the Brazilian community, for example, they have a national tournament and Mono Black Devotion takes up like 25% of that tournament, despite maybe not being the best choice, maybe not being a strong enough deck to warrant that amount of the meta share. Is there a favorite deck of Italy as well?
Yeah, there's, I think, 2 favorite choices for Italian players. First, Affinity, and second, Boros Monarch. So, Italian players usually prefer to not play the best deck if they don't like it. They prefer to play the best deck against the Tier 0. Fogtron and Blue-Red Furies, they were the 2 more expected decks. They were the 2 decks to beat, so a lot of players bring the Affinity, and I think Affinity was the most played deck. I have on my computer screen the metagame. Blue-Red Furies alongside Affinity. They were both the most played decks with a 13% of Blue-Red Furies and also another 13% of Affinity. Probably Affinity wasn't expected to be so much played. I'm sure it's probably the favorite deck for Italians. Birthmark, otherwise, it wasn't so much played because, Fogtron is probably the best deck in the format, and they were expecting Fogtron. Strangely, a lot of players played Elves. I think Elves is good. I think it's well positioned in the tabletop metagame, in the Italian metagame, but strangely, there were a lot of monogreen Elves. I don't think the monogreen version is favorited compared to the blue-green version.
Yeah, I think the online results agree with that conclusion as well. And I think if I remember correctly that the last Paupergeddon was won by Elves, so maybe that has something to do with more players playing it. I'm not 100% sure. A lot of tournaments happen. My mind is mostly a steel trap, but occasionally I do get details wrong. But it'll be interesting because if that's true, if that did actually affect the metagame on a regional level, that means the next Paupergeddon there's going to be more Fogtron, and you're to blame. But I have questions about playing Magic in real life compared to playing online, and some things are very obviously different, right? There's social interactions and such. Let's start there. I want to start with the obvious level stuff, and I want to ask about a few things that I don't think people necessarily always discuss when comparing online versus real life. But starting on the surface level stuff. So online, it's very tough to bluff somebody. But in real life, there's social interactions. How do you navigate these social interactions, right? Do you try to bluff your opponent? Are you wary of what he says and does? Could you speak to that for a minute?
Well, in real life, you can understand a lot of things while playing against face-to-face to your opponent. So you can understand sometimes what they have in their hand or what they're trying to do. After the match is finished, you can discuss with your opponent how they played or may have played. So you can understand a lot of your deck or opponent's decks, and also you can understand how to play in the format. I think if you want to understand more the format, if you want to be a better player, the tabletop version of Magic is clearly better. But Magic Online is also important if you want to play against strong players, because usually on Magic Online there are a lot of good players. If you play only on local tournaments, maybe you are not able to face so many strong players. Probably the best big paper tournaments and Magic Online tournaments are important to understand how to be a better Magic player.
Well, let's talk a little bit about facing stronger opponents. Online, usually you recognize someone's screen name, and that's when you realize that you have a tough match. And in real life, you might recognize someone's name right off the pairings. But the opposite is true as well. Sometimes it takes a little while before you realize just how good your opponent is. When you're playing in real life, how do you recognize that you're up against strong competition?
There's probably a lot of things. The body language usually is a good clue to understand how strong your opponent is. There are a lot of things more competitive players usually do. For example, shuffling your decks is the first thing. Trying to see any kind of information is usually another clue of how strong your opponent is. Also, usually strong players plays more faster than players which has just started playing in the format or in Magic in general. Well, there are some players still really slow while they are playing, but usually because they think a lot of what they can do or what is the best play. So I think that's probably the question for your answer.
I think a lot of that rings true. I just wanted to point out that with regard to the body language bit, that you can tell in two ways the strength of your opponent if you do some basic research and learn just a bit about body language. As soon as they sit down, you can tell how confident they are, which speaks volumes about how prepared they are for the event. Usually, you can also notice whether they're serious or jovial. And if they're there to have fun, chances are that they're there to have fun, and they're not going to be necessarily the strongest opponent. Additionally, in just circumstances, knowing body language is a tremendous advantage for a paper Pauper player, simply because you can look at a guy and figure out whether or not he has the counterspell, whether or not the thing that he's playing now is the bait or is the spell he's trying to stick through that he is making it try to seem maybe like it's bait. You get to play, is this bait or is this what I counterspell? More effectively if you understand body language. You also get to resolve things of your own more effectively if you understand body language. Myself, I found that I actually got kind of poor at some of these skills because I've been such an online guy for the last few years. I used to be so good at all the little angles and the reading people and all the social interactions. I used to be tremendous at that part of the game. It was a big part of my game and made up for some of my technical play when I was a younger player. I digress. The point is, I found myself actually very poor at that the last time that I actually played Magic in paper at some side events at Magic Fest or Grand Prix, whatever you want to call them. I played a lot of Pauper in 2019 at those events, and at one of them I kept revealing that I had stuff by accident. It was the last one. I was kind of tired, and it was just so obvious when I had interactions because my opponent would like go to do something and I just assumed that it was the same thing that he did last game on turn 2, right? And I'm going to spell stutter that, or I'm going to counter that, or you know what I mean? And so like he taps mana and he starts to play a card and I'm already tapping my mana to play my card. And then he plays something different, right? It's not the turn 2, I don't know, call it a Night's Whisper or something like that, something that you'd snap off. But instead it was something less relevant. I forget the exact circumstances. It happened a couple different times throughout the day, but it was really embarrassing for someone who plays at a competitive level online to just basically be shouting to my opponent, hey, I have counterspell. Hey, guess what? I have counterspell. So you have to be, the reverse is also true. You know, you have to be composed if you're playing in real life. Can you tell me about how you play in real life? Are you a serious guy? Are you, close to the vest? Or do you maybe get a bit of social interaction talking, get your opponent talking? What sort of player are you in real life?
Talking about me in real life, I'm kinda clumsy. Obviously, I'm playing fast. If I know my deck, if I know how to play my deck, I play as fast as possible because when I'm concentrated, I don't think about anything else. For example, when I'm shuffling my deck, some cards flew away. Maybe I hurt opponent's decks, so sometimes my deck or opponent's decks, if I know what is needed to play my deck, what you need to do, the game plan is, if I know how to win against my opponent, usually I'm relaxed and I can play fast, as fast as possible, because when I'm concentrated on what is the best strategy or game line, I don't think a lot of things. I just think of how to play. Anyway, if I know my opponent, we usually chit chat. We usually talk about the game or the tournament or something else. Maybe probably I need to figure out how to shuffle in a better way my deck, because I shuffle it really roguely. So I broke a lot of protection sleeves, and usually I only use Dragon Shields, and Dragon Shield are probably the toughest sleeves for a deck, and I still broke a lot of them. And also, while shuffling, sometimes some cards flew away, so I mistakenly sent them under the table or other tables. So I'm kinda clumsy when I'm shuffling the deck.
It sounds like you're having problems over there, and maybe you're a little too aggressive with some of your emotions, because I can't imagine breaking Dragon Shields, because Dragon Shields are pretty tough. So you're just using like your man strength with so much force that you're just ripping apart Dragon Shields. You got to calm down, Adepto. Just take it easy.
Yeah, probably I'm too much nervous when I'm playing in a paper tournament, because, for example, along tournament like the last Paupergeddon. It was 9 rounds, and you were able to reach the top 8 only while losing only one match. So if you win 7 match, you can afford to draw only one match. You know, if you lose 2 matches, you are not able to reach so long tournament. It probably is a kind of competitive tournament. Makes me a bit anxious or nervous, but
that's very human of you and certainly very understandable. I feel like a lot of people are going to react that way, especially as the day progresses, right? You're going to be more anxious in round 6 than you were in round 5. In round 8, if you have to get the win and in, that will be the peak of the anxiety for most players. And that's another thing that's important about playing the game successfully, is learning how to navigate that. I seem to play better. I've kind of learned over the years not to let that destroy me, because I've definitely failed at some of my first win and in situations, or maybe my first top 8s didn't go so well. So it's one of those things, when it comes to Magic, there's a lot of skills to master, and that's definitely one of them as well. I try to let it motivate me. I try to see it as an opportunity. And my question for you is tell me about the 9 rounds, right? There's 238 players, is that correct? So when we play the challenge, even though it's been a while since I played the challenge, I've only really played it once this year. The thing is, there's 6 or 7 rounds. Usually rounds 1 or 2, you're going to get something pretty random. It's rare that you get to play against one of the other top players in round 1 or 2. But after that, it becomes very easy to play against one of the good players. Of course, as the tournament progresses, rounds 4, 5, 6, if you have to play that one, you start to see some stronger competition. You get to see some better decks. In a 9-round paper tournament, how does that translate? At what round are you playing against tough competition?
Talking about my Paupergeddon, probably the most interesting and maybe competitive match I had against Boros Monarch during the 8th round. My opponent was really good at Magic. He also faced another 2 Flicker Tron during that tournament before me, and he managed to win against them. I was really lucky against him because I had really good draws. If I did poorly draws instead, I probably was never able to win against him. And probably that's clear seeing that Boros Monarch is still competitive, but it's probably... Well, I actually don't understand why Boros Monarch is not so much played on Magic Online or also in last competitive paper tournaments. Well, not sure if he's not played by top ranked players, or maybe is just a fear to face Tron or Blue-Red Fairies, because Blue-Red Fairies was a very favorable matchup for Boros Monarch, but right now is not so much favored because Blue-Red Fairies can be more grindy thanks to Mystic Sanctuary. Nowadays list of Boros Monarch are not playing so much card advantage. They're trying to rely more on cards like Seeker of the Way. So I think that player I faced during that 8th turn was really good, and I won only the game 1 because I tried to build my Ephemerate lock, and then I tried to mill him with his Palace Sentinel, with his Monarch, because they played Palace Sentinel on turn 5 or turn 6, and then they draw Bojuka Bog. They always bounced Bojuka Bog with Boros Garrison and also Korsky Fisher, so they exiled in early game 3 copies of my Muldrifters. My best win condition at that point was trying to mill him with Compulsive Research or the Monarch token, or maybe trying to draw an early Horror and then bounce their creatures, their lands, and attacking him with 1 or 2 4/4 creatures. On game 2 was still troublesome, was still difficult to me win against him because he played Palace Sentinel on turn 4, and gladly for me he didn't draw enough interactions, so I was able to swipe his board with his creatures with Fireball. After killing his creature 3 times with Fireball, I was able to stabilize, to get the control roll. I was able to set a mnemonic wall and ephemerate lock, and he wasn't able to play anything else problematic.
I mean, that's quite the match. Now, but the original question I had to do more with in the tournament that you played, right? Paupergeddon, for you and your friends, because I'm sure you're talking with your friends in between rounds. At what point does the tournament start to get competitive? Is it round 3? Is it round 4? I'm sure round 8 was the peak, the culmination of that competitiveness, as you just described, so a very competitive situation. But yeah, when does is the first round you're likely to play against, Affinity maybe, maybe someone who plays a bit more casually because there's so many players, but at some point you're going to start playing against the players that came to play. And about what time in the tournament is that?
I think the tournament starts to be more competitive between the 3rd and the 4th round, because usually less competitive players, less competitive builds start to lose much more games after the second round of the tournament.
I think that makes sense. So walk us through your tournament, right? What did you play against in those 9 rounds? And what did you lose to? Because you lost 1 round, it sounds like.
I lost the 6th round against the Blue-Red Fairies. In that tournament, I faced 3 copies of Blue-Red Fairies, actually. I was able to win against the first 2 and lose the last one, but gladly it was the last Blue-Red Fairies I faced during the tournament, because I don't really like playing against a Fairies deck, because Ninja of the Deep Powers, is actually one of my favorite blue creature in Pauper, but I don't like to play against that creature. It's really troublesome to play against it, because I played Tron, and obviously Ninjas of the Deep Power is the most troublesome card for Tron. It's a Palace Sentinel with counter spells on backup, so I don't like to play against that creature. The other rounds were Boros Bully on turn 1, Elves with the blue splash for Distant Melody, Blue Elemental Blast, Izzet Fairies, Dimir Delver, the last Izzet Fairies, Affinity, Boros Monarch, and then in the last turn of this Swiss round I was able to draw to get in the top 8. I was really lucky during the first 2 rounds, because I faced the first Boros Bully, and Boros Bully is really favorable to Fogtron, because Boros Bully can't win against the Foglock usually. If they have a lot of copies of Relic of Progenitus or Pyroblast, they can try to win that match, but it's still really difficult for them. But I was really lucky against the round 2 Elves, because he mana flooded, so they draw a lot of lands, and he wasn't able to kill me enough fast. The other matchups, Izzet Fairies and Dimir Delver, are usually grindy matchups, particularly Izzet Fairies, because they have more counter spells, they have more interaction, so the best game plan for Izzet Fairies is obviously landing an early game Ninja of the Deep Powers and draw enough counter spells and enough lands to not let me build my card advantage. Usually, I think Blue-Red Fairies is a 50-50. I think Tron has a 50% percentage win rate against Blue-Red Fairies. Usually, while playing Tron, I lose to I lose to Izzet Fairies if I'm not able to draw enough copies of Muldrifter. The last matches I faced blue-red fairies on Magic Online, for example, I lost to fairies because I draw only one Muldrifter and only one Mnemonic Wall in all the game. Timir Delver, anyway, I think is more favorable for Flickertron because they don't have Spellstutter Sprite and then they don't have any ninja. So they may have Turn of the Black Rose in sideboard, but it's not good as a ninja. You can steal their Monarch. They don't have Pyroblast to kill my Muldrifter. So sometimes you are able to resolve Muldrifter, counter their Snuff Out because the Snuff Out is usually the only removal spells they kept post side, and you are also able to steal their Monarch token. Usually, Dimir Delver can win against Tron only with a very good start, with a turn 1 Delver of Secrets, with a turn 4 or turn 5 Guma Gangler, and only if they draw enough counter spells to counter my card advantage, and if I don't draw enough answers or enough card advantage. Usually against any kind of tempo deck, Muldrifter is the best win condition and the best card advantage spell. I faced also Affinity, but my opponent was really unlucky. Game 1, she kept one land keep and she didn't draw any other land, and I had a turn 3 Urzatron with turn 4 Muldrifter, so she conceded as fast as possible. Game 2, she mulled down to 5, and I was able to win that game, only top decking a copy of Stormhound Dignitary. Then she didn't draw anything good, she mana flooded, and when I was able to set up the Foglock with Mnemonic Wall and Ephemerate, I won. In the top 8 I faced first Mono Green Elves, and then I faced again the same Dimir Delver player, and I won against both of them. Actually, I think Mono Green Elves is favorable compared to the Distant Melody version, because they can kill me only with a turn 4 kill or turn 5 kill, because they don't have Distant Melody, so they can't build an impressive board state, and they can't draw with Lead Stampede or Winning Way their primarily win condition when they are kept from attacking me. They can't draw Viridian Longbow, they can't draw Arch Sustenance, Mob Justice or Gruesome Fate, the Fireball spell from Elves. So I lose the second game against Mono Green Elves because they had a turn 3 kill with turn 2 Timberwatch Elves with double copy of Curon Ranger. So they pumped a 1/1 creature for 18 damages, and then they attacked me with 2 1/1 creature. Against that Mono Green Elves, actually, it was a really impressive match, because we both had nut draws, nut start. He has a turn 2 Timberwatch or a turn 3 Timberwatch in both game 1, game 2, and game 3. I was enough lucky to add a turn 4 or turn 3 Urzatron in game 1 with a Moment's Peace and I'm really cool. So, and also I was lucky enough to draw Ephemerate and the second colored mana, so I was able to block him starting from the fourth turn. Game 2, I was also really lucky because I kept an initial land with a turn 3 Urzatron, a Prophetic Priest, and something like 2 copies of Stormhound Dignitary. Game 2, I lose with 3 copies of Stormhound Dignitary in my hand. It was really funny. Game 3, I had a fast starting, but at certain point I needed to play around 2 copies of Fairy Macabre, because his list was playing in the sideboard 4 copies of Fairy Macabre, but I think Fairy Macabre is not enough good to kill nowadays Fogtron's list, because with Ephemerate we can bring back the fairy targets, so you you can just wait until you have enough mana and enough copies of Ephemerate, so you can bring back your spell. If they activated the first Fairy Macabre, you can play another Ephemerate, and so on. Against Dimir Delver, well, he was lucky enough to have a fast start in game 1 because they flipped 3 Delvers starting from turn 2, so they have a turn 1 Delver and turn 2 Delver and turn 4 Delver. He managed to deal enough damage to me, so I had only 2 lives left, but then I draw Stone Dignitary, and then Hoff's counter spells to stop him. So we reached a certain point when he didn't draw anything good. They had only 2 cards left in their hand, and I was able to cast Teachings from my hand to fetch Prohibit and then flashback Teachings, so the game is over. Game 2, it was really interesting because it was really grindy. I had a somewhat good hand with a lot of card advantage, but at a certain point he didn't play anything, and he attacked me for something like 10 damage with a single copy of Augur Bolas without playing anything. They had always 7 cards in their hand. They played only lands. I was also really tired by playing 10 hours of Magic, so I played poorly at a certain point, and I tried to letting my Mulldrifters and Walls resolving, but they had only counter spells in their hands, so they countered anything, and then they had Deprive and Mystic Sanctuary. The other turn they played Gurma Gangler, and they won. Played really well. I was tired and I wasn't thinking enough, so I screwed and I misplayed. In the last game against this last top 8 tournament, top 8 against Dimir Delver, I was enough lucky to have a good end. They didn't start as fast as the game 1, so when we reached a late game, I won because they didn't have anything left in their hand, and I had 2 copies of Mystical Teachings in my hand. The final, we decided to split it because it was past midnight. We finished the semifinals at 1 o'clock past the midnight, so it was really late for us because we both worked the next day, and we decided to crown Ato Shift. We decided to let Ato Shift win the largest Paupergeddon so far, because Ato Shift is much cooler compared to Flickertron.
Did that also mean that Atog Shift got the sweet altered Atog that was up for grabs?
Yeah, he also won the altered Etog, so that's another reason to let Etog Shift win.
I mean, you are 5 color. You could play Atog in your deck if you wanted to. You have the fixing for it, and you have some artifacts. I mean, if you really wanted to play it, I mean, you could, but it probably look much better in your opponent's sleeves than yours.
Yeah, I probably need another copy of Expedition Map to support better Atog. Also, it was probably my friend's first top 8 in a Paupergeddon, so let him winning the tournament. I thought it was just better. I also top 8'd in the last 2 editions in Milan of the Paupergeddon, so for me it was enough.
Well, you're putting together quite the impressive resume, top 8ing multiple Paupergeddons. Which one means the most to you, your first one or the most recent one?
I think both 3 of them are important to me, but the first one and the last one, in my opinion, are the 2 most important. The first one, we didn't play the top 8, so it wasn't really a win. Because I won the Swiss round with elves, we decided to split the top 8, so I was the winner, but I wasn't really the winner. Being able to play in the top 8 and winning the top 8 match, I think is more important than just winning only the Swiss round and then winning the tournament because you split the top 8.
Makes perfect sense. Now, did you already share with us your play of the day when you went through your tournaments, or do you have another sweet one to share?
The play I'm most proud of in this last edition of Paupergeddon is probably killing a Gurmagangler in my end phase with Afterlife. Afterlife is a weird white Doomblade. I played it because it can kill Ultimus Crusher, Gurmagangler, something else. My opponent with Dimir Delver in Swiss round in my hand phase played Tragic Lesson, leaving only one blue mana open, so I tried to kill their Gurmagangler with Afterlife, hoping they don't had any Spell Pierce or Dispel, because they left only one blue mana open, and they had only Hydroblast, so and I was able to kill their Gurmagangler with a weird looking card that left one token spirit on the owner's creature's battlefield. And my opponent, when I played that card, had a look in their face that it seems like it wasn't understanding what is happening, and it was really satisfying. And the next turn I was also able to kill the other Gurmagangler with Fireball. It was really funny. It was really fun.
It's pretty unique. I do want to start wrapping up, and the other weekly segment we generally do is give Slivers a silly ability. Do you have a silly Slivers ability?
Yeah, my Sliver ability today is sacrifice an artifact to get +2/+2 to target Sliver.
So it talks Slivers?
Yeah, a Tog Sliver.
Okay. So how much does this Sliver cost?
Well, my Sliver costs 1 generic mana, 1 red mana, and 1 green mana.
Okay. So not just a Tog Sliver. There's a little, you got to work for this one a little bit.
Yeah, it's Forest a Tog Sliver.
I guess that would stop it from being played as an additional copy of a Tog, an Affinity, and a Tog Shift. Because if you make it cost 1 and a red, those decks are just going to play, this silly Sliver as well as a Tog, which is already, a silly a Tog. My silly Slivers ability this week is I feel like all Slivers have had their genders assumed, right? Because we're always talking about Sliver Lords, right? We're never talking about Sliver Ladies, okay? Like, all right, so Muscle Sliver is probably a Sliver Lord, right? But Sinew Sliver, look how feminine Sinew Sliver is. That's a Sliver Lady right there. That's a Lady Sliver for sure. Because like Sliver Queen, right? So there are Lady Slivers. That's been established as at least one. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they work like a hive like insect, so there can only actually be one female, and someone's gonna correct me on this at some point on social media. Someone's gonna be like, actually that's not how Slivers work, but that's okay. I'll look forward to that. Thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. It was really interesting talking about the differences between online play and playing in real life.
Thank you.
And thanks once more to my guest for coming on the podcast. It is a pleasure. Paupergeddon is a beautiful thing, and I can't wait before the end of the Pauper Players podcast to go experience it myself. I'd hoped to do it for this event, but found myself unable due to the timing. And while I'm glad that because of their choice of a date, the community was able to gather in a large event despite the fear of the coronavirus, which would happen essentially just 1 week later in Italy, it did exclude me from the event that date. We'll see if I can make the one in the summer. If not, I'm hoping to make the one in the fall. A note to end on this week. We heard AdeptoTerra say that he did not enjoy playing against Ninja the Deep Hours, which is interesting because there's been a lot of discourse on this podcast about the strength of Tron over the past few months. Since the banning of Astrolabe, that's really been the entire conversation, is Tron. It kept winning or putting 2 to 3 copies of itself in every top 8. As a result, we've spoken with a lot of Tron players over the course of this podcast, and this week was no exception. Tron's still doing quite well, But it was interesting to hear the Tron player finally say what they didn't want to play against, because up till now they've seemed quite amicable with all of their potential matchups. Not really too worried. But Ninja the Deep Hours is putting Tron in the corner, which is interesting. I suspect Mystic Sanctuary has already broken out online. If we look at recent results, it's starting to become the next topic of discussion. So I would imagine, as the Pauper Players podcast continues, that'll probably be where the discussion of Pauper shifts. So it'll probably shift away from Tron and onto Mystic Sanctuary as being what is format defining at this time. That's my prediction. That's my take. Going to do my best to speak with the other gentleman who split the finals of Paupergeddon, as well as track down the winner, or in lieu of the winner of the Pauper Showcase that's happening, the most interesting deck in that top 8. Whichever one I think more Pauper players are going to play, I'm going to track down that pilot and have a nice conversation with them. Can't wait to bring that to you. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next week.